You're listening to the Coach's Journey podcast, exposing the struggles and celebrating the successes in the life of coaches who are action takers and creating authentic impact in today's world. Whether you're just starting out, expanding your reach, or exploding your impact, you're in the right place right now. Stay tuned and be sure to subscribe to this podcast. Now, here are your hosts of the Coach's Journey podcast.
All right, what's up, Coaches Nation? Great to see you again on this Wednesday for us. It may be another day that you're listening to it, but we're grateful and thankful to have you listening to or watching us today and engaging in this conversation, even if it's only in your own mind, and that is okay. I'm Dr. Sheri Fluellen with our co-host Faisal Ensaun, and we are here today to chat with really the most foundational question that we could possibly be asking as coaches. And Faisal, what is that most basic question?
So the basic question is, what is coaching and what is it not? And we will explore this topic, not from the stance of, hey, we know what the answer is, but just we're going to dare to explore this topic, and we'd love to hear your perspective on it too. So make sure you post your comments and engage the conversation, because I think it's going to help us understand what coaching might really be and how we can serve our clients the best way possible.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm sure that if you're watching this, you're going to have some sort of experience or nugget of truth or, some wisdom that you can share with us as well. So feel free to reach out and, put a comment below or DM, PM, email, all the things. Feel free to get a hold of us, because we would love to be able to understand your perspective and include that in kind of the way that we think and the way that we talk about coaching. But before we launch into that most important question, first, let's talk a little bit about our sponsor, the Coaching Mastery Community. Faisal, tell us what the Coaching Mastery Community is in your words.
So the Coaching Mastery Community is a fun, exciting, amazing, collaborative community of coaches who come together to help each other work on their skills, to level up their skills as coaches, but also level up their skill sets as business owners. And so their coaching mastery skills, their mastery around their coaching skills and their mastery around their business skills in a supportive and collaborative environment.
Absolutely. It's that supportive and collaborative atmosphere that I think is so important. I've run a number of marathons in my life. Admittedly, it's been probably 6 years since the last one, so I'm totally out of shape. But when I would run a marathon, and there would be a group of us, even though we never had met each other ever before, there would be a group of us that would kind of have a similar pace, but somebody inevitably would be a little bit faster. And what happens is that we kind of stayed clustered for the most part through all 26.2 miles of running, but the one that was slightly faster ended up setting the pace. And so even, when I would just be running around my town training, I wouldn't have as fast a pace because I was by myself. But when I was able to stay in this group of other runners, even though, like I said, I didn't know them from Adam, I would inevitably have a little bit of a quicker pace throughout the actual marathon, because I, was looking and I was like, well, if they can step it up a little bit more, I bet I can. And so there was this competitive but collaborative environment in that. And so I think about that when I think about the CMC, because I think there's some similar dynamics. When you're by yourself doing this stuff, you can get tired, you get in your head, and and it can slow you down. But when you're around other people who are also doing things that can encourage you, that can show you that no, you can keep pace, or you can do things, do the big hard things that take a lot of courage. Sometimes we end up being able to do more than we thought we could initially. So there's huge value in being in a community like this.
Yes, for sure. Completely agreed. And I love that analogy.
All right. What the heck is coaching? What is it and what is not? this is one of the most foundational questions because we are coaches. So shouldn't we, of all people, have a conception around the boundaries of what we're doing, or are there no boundaries? These are the questions that we must ask ourselves. And so
I would
we are going to
like
explore
no
this today as
boundaries.
Faisal. Yes, I know you would. Boundaries, though, provide an opportunity for innovation. So I kind of am in favor of boundaries. That's just my perspective.
Ooh, I like this. It's going to be spicy.
I don't know that I've ever had somebody refer to a podcast as spicy. I like it. Little habanero.
Because I prefer my food spicy.
So habanero spicy or curry spicy?
Actually, both. They both. I like them both independently in different dishes, not together.
Not together. I don't know if I've ever had it together. That could be interesting. So let's just start. What is your, like, if somebody were to walk up to you and say, Faisal, what is coaching? What are you doing? Like, you used to be an engineer. If you've heard his story, used to be an engineer, used to have a real job, and now you're a coach. I'm sure you've heard that before. And now you're a coach. What are you doing?
Oh, I just talk to people. That's what I'm saying.
This is going to be the shortest podcast we've ever had. The answer is talk to people.
Yes. Let's separate what we would tell people from what we do in coaching, because I think what we tell people, it's kind of an inkling of an experience. And what I might tell people is that, I help people develop clarity around who they are in their path in life, help them create their vision and their goals, and help them dig deeper into who they're becoming and what their purpose might be as they move forward. And I also work on helping them develop better relationships and a better way of approaching their business. I might say something like that if they just need some sentences from me. I like asking more questions around, like, well, tell me a little bit about your path. So I might do a version of the coaching with them within that conversation. But beyond that, and the reason we brought up this topic is that we've had, whether in our community, in Coaching Mastery community, or when I've talked to other coaches, especially from different modalities, they're different. I found that there might be some core principles around coaching. But then there are different ways and strategies, there are different approaches to how we create that experience of coaching. And that's what I think, if we're going to ground in something, is that coaching is an experience. How that experience shows up will vary drastically in different modalities. But essentially, the reason it's why partly it's very hard to explain what coaching is, because it's more of an experience. So if you haven't gone through that experience, it's very hard to describe it. Yeah. It's like trying to describe to somebody something that they've never experienced before. So somebody who has never gone out of their, let's say somebody who lives in, I've known a few people who, for example, live in downtown Toronto region, and they've never gone out of that world. And they don't care about traveling or anything like that. Trying to explain what it would be like to walk the streets of Calcutta in India or in Dominican Republic, and what that atmosphere of it. But it's even harder because they at least have a conception of what streets look like, what different variations, but they will have a hard time understanding that people do all sorts of weird things in those environments that people don't do here. Like, for example, living in Pakistan, which is close to India, they used to be India back then. Like if you walk, for example, where we lived, it was like a very busy, very highly polluted environment, but there was a lot of richness in the sense that when you would walk outside, the smells that you would get, the variation of it, you would not experience anything. You will smell cows, you will smell people, you will smell all sorts of different foods, you will smell the traffic, the cars. It's more like so many different variations, fruits, meats, anything, because everything was out in the open. Like if you walk down the street, it wouldn't be like you go to a mall and get a grocery store and get a bunch of stuff. There were vendors. Yeah. You would go to a vendor would be there, and maybe this might be graphic for somebody. We would go, and there were a bunch of chickens in there. They're live. You would tell them, hey, that chicken. They would cut the chicken, slaughter the chicken right there, drop him in a bucket, and the chicken is fluttering around, and then literally break it open and give you the chicken. It's not pre-packaged in the way that it's shown here. So like you get to see the whole experience of what happens. And then everything else, like we would literally go to a stable and ask for milk. Like we would see the cow there milking the cow, like raw. And it was a very different experience. Now trying to explain that to somebody here who's never experienced that, they would get inklings of it because they have some familiarity with some things around it, but they still wouldn't, it's not the experience itself. I think coaching is a lot like that, but even more so because if you haven't gone through that process, you will bring your own preconceptions to it of, and you will hear almost always, oh, you train people. Yeah. Oh, it's like that life coaching stuff. And they wouldn't know what that is because they just hear a bunch of life coaches talking and training on video and audio. But yeah, the
experiential piece, like you just described, when you experience something, all of your senses are part of it. Because as you were talking, Faisal, I could picture the meat hanging. So I've been to Israel. And I remember walking through markets in Jerusalem, and you've got the meat hanging, the flies buzzing around. You've got the cats that are hoping to get a little sampling. Yeah. You've got all the crazy food smells, and then when people eat the foods, eat the smelly, not the smelly, but eat the food that then they like start to smell, like they start to sweat a certain scent. And so there's all of this stuff going on that when you were talking about that, I could visualize it, but I could also recall the smells and the sounds and all of these things.
Yeah.
And so even if somebody has never been, doesn't have that experience, maybe they think like, oh, I could picture that in my mind, but they're missing out on all of the other senses that go to that full experience. And so with coaching, there is more of a full experience. However, virtually, like I can't smell you for better or worse, so but there's an emotional component that is critical to the whole experience of coaching. So I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about and remind people that with the idea of an experience, the more that we can include all of our senses in that, the more powerful it is, because we learn more when we're able to involve more of our processing, kind of how we process and filter things. And when you include tastes and smells and sounds and memories and all of those sorts of things, it deepens one's learning. Just kind of wanted to add that piece.
Yeah, I love that. And then just the way that you, like when I shared that, you remembered going to Israel and the market there. But imagine you hadn't gone to that market. You would have a very hard time picturing some of those things. You would create a conception of what you would see in the supermarket here. Like, how would that work?
Right.
You would have a hard time picturing a lot of it.
Or a movie.
Or a movie. And then
are not always accurate. Sorry to burst your bubble, people.
That's why don't judge places based on a movie. Because it's very different.
I grew up in North Dakota, and I'm telling you, I cannot tell you how many times people were, when the movie Fargo came out, I grew up an hour from Fargo, North Dakota, and they were like, oh, I've seen the movie. I'm like, no. We do not talk as ridiculously Norwegian as the people in Fargo do. Like, So you think you see something, it's not reality.
Yeah, and then it actually points to a bigger truth, and that's what we're actually going to have Dean Jacobs here, and I think he's going to talk about that more. And his story is very interesting because he, especially around 9/11 time, when he heard all these things around, like all these people that are attacking U.S. and that's what he decided, like, I'm going to go see these police people for myself instead of taking it from the news. And what he found in his experience was completely different what the news was talking about. It was a very different world, and he wouldn't have expected that unless he went there. And this is why, and it also is important for us as coaches. So when we're talking to somebody from a different culture who's had a different type of experience than us, you have to be incredibly curious and help them put those pieces together to even ask the right question, because your questions might be based on your experience that might be completely different than what they experienced in their life. And it's just, and that's why I love this, because the more people we work with, the more it pushes us to expand our tool belt, our perspective, our experiences. And that's why when you meet a lot of coaches, they've had a rich experience of life a lot of times. And that's actually why they connect with so many different people. And I also wanted to point out that coaching, that experience, as you mentioned, the senses. So even though we're sitting probably virtually in a room, the human mind is incredibly powerful in the sense that it can create the experiences if you're there. Like, I just went through an experience of coaching with one of our coaches from our community, and it's conscious parenting coaching. And it was like, I could remember the tastes, I could remember the sounds, I could remember the specifics of what I went through as a child. And I could connect to it like it was right in front of me. Mm-hmm. That we don't do that on a regular basis and get the lessons, get the experience. Well, how do I look at it now? What were the consequences of those experiences, positive or negative? It gets you to think things and remember things at levels that you can't actually do that with a lot of other modalities, such as podcasts or books or other things. You can do that with books sometimes. You can do that with podcasts sometimes, but we go much deeper. So it definitely, I love what you said, that it does engage our senses, but it's not just senses, that our senses, but it's also our emotions, our thoughts about all aspects of our life, our past, present, and future. And a lot of coaching, and that might be another distinction, is that coaching, it might have a defining characteristic that we're not always, we don't go and get stuck in the past. We use past as a way to gain perspective and wisdom, but we live in the present and we are building towards whatever we're building towards. So it's very present and future oriented. Yeah. What's happening right now and what are you building towards? What can you use from your past? What are you stuck in your past with that we can move through? That might be a theme in coaching. What do you think, Dr. Sheri?
Yeah, as you were talking, I think one of the ways that I approach coaching and think about it is, as you were talking about, like, there's the emotions, there's your thoughts, and there's your actions. I come from a cognitive behavioral background as a psychologist, which is all about, the way you think, the way you feel, and what you do. Like, those are the three components that they focus on. And so it's, I think about it, I guess, as a way of integrating and uniting all of those things in a way that works for us. And, because when I'm living my life and I'm doing something that is not consistent with how I want to feel or what I think, or I'm thinking something that's not consistent with how I'm actually acting, like, there's a disconnect. And so one of the ways, I guess, I conceptualize coaching, which kind of comes a little bit out of therapy, but is bringing some unity to all of that, so that who I am in the present, I'm in full awareness. I am being very intentional. Intentionality is a word that I love. Like I try to be intentional about everything I do. And so it's shining a spotlight on all the things. So you kind of know what's going on, you know who you are, what's driving you, what's motivating you, what's contributing to what you're doing, so that your intentionality around what you do going forward is there, and you're not just continuing to act on things that you really haven't decided you want in your life. So it's kind of like you're kind of cleaning house in some respects, like you've got that junk drawer that you pull out and you're like, oh God, and then you close it real quick because it's so full of stuff. But you open the junk drawer, you take everything out, you look at it, you're like, you consider, okay, this is a pen. It's a pen that was given to me from my dead grandpa, but it doesn't work anymore. The ink's gone. Is it really serving me right now? No, it's not. So I'm going to throw it out. I recognize that, I still love my grandpa, but I don't have to keep the pen because it doesn't work. And then you pull the next thing out and you look at it intentionally and like, is that, so I kind of think about it like that, our life is this junk drawer. We've got all the stuff that we've accumulated. Some of it is useful and valuable. Some of it's not. And it's just being intentional about examining all the things and choosing what we need, what we want, what's going to serve us, what provides some sort of value, and not just letting it exist because it already exists.
Yeah, I love that analogy, and what that in that intentionality you're sharing is, to me, that translates to conscious awareness.
Mm-hmm.
And a big part of our assumption in coaching might be is that we can change subconscious patterns into conscious intentional patterns that we get to create. And so there are different modalities in there how we would do that. But going back to your analogy, so I'll make it even more vivid there. So you have a big drawer of a bunch of stuff. You have a pen from your dead grandmother. You pick it up. You don't notice it's so hot. You drop it. So there's pain in there. You don't want to touch that again. So you have to find a way to deal with that without getting burned and move it forward. And then you have another thing that smells really bad, and then you don't know how to deal with the smell. And then you have this section, there's so much clutter, you can't even make sense of it. Like, how am I going to deal with this? There are some useful things that I see, but how do I separate the useful from not useful? And this is where, when you go into human psyche and our emotions and our thoughts, there's a lot of pain in there. There's a lot of disorganization in there. There's a mix of all sorts of mixes of positive, negative. They're also jumbled up. And the way it shows up in our behavior is that we can't even think of being intentional because we don't know what we're being intentional towards. Because even the things that we think we're being intentional around, they are a part of that same jumble. So then I feel like a coach's job is to help that person organize, just like you said, go through it one by one. Sometimes it would be painful to go through that. Sometimes it will feel overwhelming. Holy shoot, there's so much in there. Sometimes it will feel like, what am I doing here? Sometimes it will feel like exciting, because you can sometimes say, and this is the other side of it, you can sometimes say, okay, I'm going to shut this drawer. Let me ideally imagine what kind of drawer I want to have.
Yes.
And then that's where it gets future paced. You create an ideal, and then you open that drawer again. Okay, does this fit into that ideal? So, and this is where different modalities will come in. We can talk specifically about those things, but that's another foundation of it, that we're using. Our assumption is that we can use conscious awareness to interrupt old negative patterns or amplify patterns that are positive in our life. What do you think about that?
So one of the things that I recognized that I did not get enough focus on in my training as a psychologist was this future focus. And I think, and I'm not going to say every psychologist or therapist out there, it functions the same way I did. But I recognize that because I was so, had to be so focused on diagnoses and, okay, is this person, is this person depressed? Is it a major depressive episode? Is this reoccurring? Is it bipolar? It's like I had to pick apart all of the symptoms. And so what I ended up meeting with somebody, I found myself focused on how can they be less depressed? And that's what I focused on, and it seriously was not until I let go of the mental health world and embraced the coaching world and learned, okay, so if I want to be a coach, what does that mean? How's that going to change how I'm going to practice? I had that epiphany of like, oh my gosh, I didn't help people move forward to an ideal vision of their future. I tried to help them run away from what they didn't want. But how can you leave what you don't want if you don't have a picture of where you do want to go? And so, so I don't know if anybody's going to resonate with this, but that was a huge, huge break, positive break, that I had in my own conceptualization of how I used to work versus how kind of what was missing, and that future pacing, that future, vision building, and helping people know what they want, because that is giving, I think, far more fuel and internal motivation to move away from what they don't want. It's like quitting smoking. It's, and I taught people, I did a lot of behavioral work around quitting addictions. And it's hard for somebody to quit smoking unless they have a replacement for smoking. And so, some of the most common replacements are like, chewing on carrot sticks, or, having a sucker or gum or something. But your mouth needs something because it's just so used to always having something in it. So you got to replace it in order to then work through the addiction. Is the most smooth way out of an addiction. There has to be a positive replacement. I just never thought about that with, if somebody's wanting to move out of depression, there has to be a positive replacement, which of course is, what they want their life to look like, all the love and the appreciation and feeling connected and lack of loneliness, all of that sort of stuff. So anyway, I feel like I totally went on a side track with that, but that's something I realized I was completely missing.
Yeah. And even we're learning that also therapy might be shifting too towards something like that, where the newer models of therapy are taking into account what people are building. But what we're talking actually about is actually a wisdom that's been around for the longest time. And there's a danger in there too. So for example, if somebody believes in a specific religion, and that religion has the effects of it has been positive and negative in that person's life. If you actually take that person's concept of the world that's shaped heavily by that religion, their core values, how they look at themselves, how they look at others, how they see the future, and you take that religion away from them, as in, let's say, disprove it completely. It doesn't make sense, doesn't apply, you've been sold a fairy tale. That is incredibly dangerous for a person, because you just took a structure with which that they have been able to make sense of reality, and you took it away. And then there's this phrase we hear a lot that says, nature abhors vacuum. So when you take that, what is going to be naturally replacing that? If there isn't something that can give it that stable structure or a version of that, then there's chaos.
Yeah.
And that chaos can be, and I've gone through that. Like I've been a religious person, and I've gone through it, and I took that away myself in a sense, or some people helped me. But when I was in that place, I was depressed as hell until I started putting pieces together, and it was hard. Start to put pieces together of a whole different perception of the world, and I had to even then resort to some of my perceptions of what my religion gave me, because it's built on generations of experience and knowledge and perspective and so many things. It's not just in my lifetime. So and like you were talking about, in the sense that a cigarette smoking, like what do we replace that with? So a lot of behavior, a lot of thoughts and emotions, they need to be given a different alternative. And that might be another aspect of coaching, is that we help people create options in their life. Because a lot of people, when you're in a painful situation or you're stuck in a part in a part of your business or life or anywhere, you might not actually see different options because you're probably in your fight or flight state and your vision is tunnel vision. You can only see a few things. But if you get them to step back, relax, they begin to use their conscious mind. People usually have quite a few alternatives of how they could approach it based on the kind of life that they're creating, that future paced life.
Yeah.
So that might be, is coaching might be helping them come up with the options based on their life. And the assumption I have, there's an assumption there that, and this is where I think there's a distinction between a trainer and a coach, because a trainer's assumption is that the expert trainer knows what is good for this person. But a coach's assumption might be that this person knows about their life much more than I do. So while my perspective could add to that, it can't be the end all be all. This person has to look at the contents of their whole past, present, future, and figure out what will serve them best. So helping them generate options, we can still teach, we can still give perspective, but going back to them is, how do you think this applies to your life, and what do you think you can do moving forward? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I definitely, that's definitely part of how I function and how I've kind of shifted my own mindset, is helping, because I think two things I think there's two things that I hold true at the same time. One of them is that there is truth. There is truth in the world with the capital T. It's unchangeable. It doesn't matter your opinion. It's still, it is what it is. And so I think helping people so the large T and then the small T, I'll use the small T as like an individual's truth about certain things. And so I think part of it is a process of helping people identify the big T's, their small T's, and then and not just necessarily assuming that they are correctly categorized, but helping them recognize them and recognize that some of the ways that they've been viewing the world aren't a big T, and maybe they're not even a small T. Like, we have we act on things that we believe to be true without really examining them. I mean, these are the most simplest is, I make a mistake in something or do something and I'm like, oh, I'm so stupid, okay, so am I really stupid? So we function off of these ideas that we have. And so when we're able to recognize and help our clients develop a process for creating more awareness and recognizing them and helping them evaluate the truthfulness of it, and then to be able to create an alternative truth for the small T's. That's part of also how I conceptualize my work as a coach, is helping people. Another way of thinking about it is narrative therapy. Has a strong, not overbearing presence in the mental health world, but it's solidly there. And it's the idea that, we write our stories and we create frameworks and narratives around what happened. But it's just a story. And we can change. You may not be able to change the literal facts of an event, but you can change the story and the meaning around it that will then change how it impacts us. And so that's kind of part how I think about my role. And I think the role of most coaches, I don't know if I could say that that's universal, like that would be a thing that I would, a part of a definition of a coach. But maybe it could be.
Yeah, and I think it definitely could be. And we're talking about, well, what is, and I think Eckhart Tolle gave a good analogy around this, is that, so every day that we wake up, if we were able to see the sunrise or sunset when we're going to sleep, or after that, when we are seeing the sun, and we say it in our expression too, is the sun is rising. That's the truth for us, but that's actually a small T, as you mentioned, because if you go outside of Earth, there is no such thing that's happening. The sun is not rising or setting.
Right.
It's very different. And that's one objective perspective. So the way it works in my mind, at least, I think that the T's get bigger and bigger and bigger in the universe. That outside of Earth, it might look a certain way, but if you go farther out, it might look even different. If you go outside of, if we're able to, now we're entertaining the idea of a multiverse outside of our galaxy and then universe, it might completely change our perception and concept of reality. So that big T for me is very dynamic because it shifts based on our collective perspective.
Yeah.
So when we say objective truths, it's certain truths that we have agreed on as a collective species. And even that we differ quite a bit in so many different things. But let's say, and even within objective truths, there are other things that go on. So, but then there's our subjective reality, which is just as important. Mm-hmm. And our subjective realities is that, and there are small T's in there. But what ends up happening is that we pick up versions of that reality based on the perceptions given to us by our culture, by the society we live in. And we accept certain things as just as it is, even though they might not be fully objective. And I'll give you an example. So for me, I realized that based on my experience, because I lived a good part of my life in the Eastern world. I was born in Afghanistan. I lived in Pakistan a good part of my life. That world is incredibly different in the way, just like I described that imagery, in the way that they operate. They're still human beings. They still have the same needs. They still have human values. But the way it expresses itself is incredibly different. But the people who are living there, including me, we were taught to take certain things that are incredibly subjective to us as people, but also subjective to the collective, to be the ultimate big T. And that was my assumption. Like, oh, that's who I am. That's how things are. And now pluck me down in Canada in my teenage years, the worst time, and expose me to this culture. Almost most of what I was taught as that big T started crumbling down. Yeah. And then I started to question almost everything. It's like, who am I? That I'm not that person I was taught I was. What are these things that we believe to be fully true, but people here don't believe it fully? Yeah. And then I noticed the same thing here. There are certain things that people take for truth, big T's, but they're not. It's either their cultural truths or their personal truths. Mm-hmm. They're very important, but they haven't actually taken the time to make sense of it. And a big part of that goes back to is that we don't have it as a part of our education familial system to help people make sense of these things. That's why there's a lot of this rhetoric around, well, the education system has failed. Parents don't know what to do with kids, because we really don't. None of us know how to move forward. I think it goes, for me, like historically, if you were to track that down, it goes back to the industrial age. As soon as you put people in a different environment, different context, you take them out of their small communities and you put them in these big cities, you're throwing out a bunch of stuff that was very essential to the human experience, such as community, a sense of community, a sense of connecting at levels that we can't connect in the bigger city world, civilized world. And part of that was a rite of initiation that would happen in these cultures. Like every generation passed on certain things through multiple avenues, through your parents, but aunts and uncles, community leaders. That doesn't exist anymore. So it got all compartmentalized to nuclear families, education system, corporate system, blah, 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 blah. And I think we missed the boat on some of these things. And now we're at a point after doing, 100 plus years of experiment, we're like, holy shoot, we forgot about some essential things in this picture. And then this might be the reason why coaching is becoming a bigger part, because it's getting too complex for people to make sense of it without that generational passing on of information. Yeah. What do you think about that? I might have made it too complicated.
Well, as you were talking, I was thinking about kind of the relevant situation I think about a lot every day in my house. And, I have a child, I have 4 kids, And my oldest, who's 14, she has a very strong personality. And she's very, some of the words that could be used to describe her are like dominating, a lot of negative words. And I see a lot of those, the negative connotation of her personality coming out in school. Like she's got a lot of conflicts with friends. Some kids say they don't like her because she's got an opinion about everything, and she's pretty confident in her opinion. And as a parent, I look at that and I'm like, I'm thinking in my mind, like, girl, like you are going to be kick butt someday in the real world, when she's got enough room to find her niche, where like her personality characteristics and the way she is can be a strength, rather than this narrow little, preconceived, environment that she's in right now, that's super tiny, and is not fostering her in the way that I would prefer. And so I look at that and I'm like, what do I do? But beyond what do I do, the reason that reminds me what we're talking about, because, we like her vision is, and her experiences are that, all this feedback she's getting from her peers, which is super limited, because I'm an adult, I've lived places, I've seen things. I have a much broader perspective than she does, but she doesn't feel that way. She does, because she never experienced it. She doesn't know all the other things that I know. And so kind of putting myself in a position of coach with her, it's like, how do I help her break out of these small T's that she thinks she has in life, that she is a certain way, or, I don't want her to believe some of the things that people might be, unintentionally teaching her, and so I've had the thought, I'm like, okay, well, if I'm her coach, which ultimately I'm her mom, like it's my job to help shape her, to help her develop, which as similar qualities as a coach, moving her into, giving her the experiences of something different that can expand her perspective, help her write a new narrative to her story. All of those things I think are super applicable as well. So as you were talking about that, that's where my mind went, is like, in my own little bubble of a world with my family, we can see the microcosms of, the bigger society, but now we're talking a small, private school that has like 80 students, and it's, we can't get away from our environment impacting us that way. But I think the more that we can recognize and get different perspectives, we can at least have some more choices, conscious choices around what we're choosing to, the information we're choosing to use to write our story and our narrative around our life, and around what's possible, and around what we want and where we're headed and who we want in our lives through the process.
Yeah, and then there's actually some data to back that whole narrative idea as well. So some of the coaches might have heard of Dr. Jordan Peterson, who's a psychologist. He became famous because of the whole political thing. He was from Toronto here, around the freedom of speech stuff that happened. But he has a coaching program as well that he created, and it's all around narrative. Is that what he does is he helps, I haven't gone through the program, but the way he's explaining, and they have collected data around it too, is that if what they do is they get people to write about what happened in their past. They get people to write what's like everything that happened in their past. And parts of it I do in my coaching as well, is to really make sense of the narrative that they have, the story that they tell themselves, and see the positive and the negative, and then write what's happening now, and write what they would ideally want to happen. And as people start to write this narrative, they start to pull out, well, regardless of what's happened, what do I want to create in this mix?
Yeah.
it gets them to become conscious that there is a power there that they can utilize that's inside of them. They're not just a product of an environment. That's one piece of it. It's a powerful piece, but they have this exertion of will that they can use there. A lot of times we use that willpower or energy as a way to combat things that we can't control. But then what it gets the people to do, and this is what we do in coaching, it helps them notice that there are a few things you can control in your life. If you focus that energy there, it can completely drastically change your life instead of thinking about what politics is doing or something else is doing for you, which you have no control over, the weather or whatever else. So it's also around that conservation of energy. How do you utilize your mental, physical, emotional, spiritual energy there? And then the next level of that might be is the challenge piece. And I think the thing that distinguishes coaches from most other conversations is that it doesn't matter if we're dealing with a business owner, a mom, or a parent, or parents, or a sibling, or whoever, whatever role they have in life. In most cases, when people are talking to others, if you actually listen to people's conversations, people will share something, and the other person, who might be a friend or a sibling, will know that this thing that they're talking about is just a story, and they're just saying, but most people wouldn't challenge that. They would comfort the other side. So as coaches, we do that. We do comfort at times to help them to feel safe, that they are in a safe environment. But then the next level is challenge them to, hey, the thing that you're telling yourself, the story that you're telling, is that really true? Do you think it's something that you've convinced yourself of? Or where do you think that comes from, that thought process? Where did you get that belief from? Because this is what I observe based on who you are right now. And is that ideal towards the vision that you're carrying forward? So it gets challenging their thought process, but also challenging how their emotions show up in their life. Are they in control of them? Same thing with their behavior. How are they showing up? And that's where the idea of intentionality comes in. Are they being intentional or congruent with their ideal beliefs? Or is it random? And I can say that personally, in my experience, that challenge piece, assuming that the safety part is done, assuming that I've established rapport, assuming that I've helped them dig deeper, the challenge piece is the part that has helped me become more successful as a coach.
Yeah. And as you were talking, it reminded me that of times where, I've had people kind of argue, like, why should I come see you as a psychologist or a coach? I've got plenty of friends. Like, and so their perception of, they have this perception, like, as you said at the beginning of today, I just talk to people. I do that all the time, and that's what some people think. Like, why do I need to pay somebody to talk to them? Like, I got plenty of friends and family. But it's, our friends and our family, they usually don't like to see us in discomfort. And when they see us in discomfort, they're uncomfortable and they want to make everybody comfortable again. And so a lot of times our friends and family, as well as tensioned as they are, and there's a place for that, they just want to comfort, as you said, they want me to feel better, but they may not have the skill set or the desire to challenge me in my discomfort, that there's an opportunity to grow. And so that, I think, is one of the uniquenesses of that a coach brings, is that challenge piece. I do care that you're, uncomfortable. However, this is an opportunity here, not, again, it's our framework. It's our story around it. As a coach, my story that I tell myself is when I see my client and, struggling and uncomfortable or in some sort of pain, that's a light bulb to me, like, there's an opportunity to change, not, oh my God, like I got to get him to, feel happy again. That's not typically how we approach things. And so I think there's, thinking about what we're not as a coach, we're not just another person to talk to that people pay for to be a friend, to make them feel better by the end of the session. I don't think that's one of our roles.
Yeah. And I think that's more of an effect of coaching, is that people naturally, when they get connected to their own power, when they get connected to their own awareness that they have a lot of say in what happens in their life, they tend to feel better, but that doesn't mean they don't feel pain. In fact, I think I would say a lot of times there's a huge correlation around how much pain a person feels in a coaching session and their progress. Because and this is something that we all and by the way, how it shows up, what you mentioned with people who are in our life, with our friends, family, and the rest, there's a comfort piece. But even if a person feels like they want a challenge, how that shows up is advice, as advice.
Yeah.
And advice is always incomplete. It's always taking a small portion of what might or might not apply, and without even understanding what this person's situation fully is. And most of the time, it doesn't work. Sometimes it might work.
And the other piece to it is there's a lot of research about what happens internally when we are told what to do. There's almost this instinctual resistance to being told what to do. And so even if it's the most amazing advice, spot on, takes everything into context, we have this resistance because somebody is kind of telling us what to do. So part of the power of coaching is you may be thinking oh, I really think they should be doing this. And my husband calls this, the mat, whatever, what does he call it? But I forget now, but when I ask him questions to help him kind of discover what he needs to do, he's like, that's what you wanted me to do all along, isn't it? And I'm like, well, maybe, but you came up with it, so you can't blame me for, it's your idea. So I think that's part of the magic of coaching too, is being able to ask questions in a way that helps the other person, develop a good solution. And maybe it's not the best solution, but if they come up with a good solution, you come up with the best solution, their good solution is going to win out every time because it was theirs.
And this is why I think it reminded me of a lecture from Alan Watts, a philosopher, who said that the way you put it, that will define coaching as a female art, is that male psychology is that you do what I tell you to do it for, and this is what will work for you. Female psychology is that, what do you think about doing this thing? And they're like, oh yeah, I could do this thing. And then this person does it, not realizing that it wasn't their idea to begin with. So getting them to see, not in a manipulative way, but and this is where I think the next level, and this is the level that I'm challenging myself to go towards. Not only as a coach, but as a human being who's growing. And I think Michael Neal called this as the vertical realm of coaching. So he made a differentiation in his book, Super Coach, around there's horizontal coaching, which might look like as, hey, somebody's having issues with their productivity. So what we might do is explore their life and be like, and get them to generate options, get them to do some things differently, come up with a different plan. That's kind of a horizontal part of coaching. But the vertical might in that context look like is that, well, what do you think of productivity? What is your perception of productivity? Where did you get it from? And then that might go to more of what you said around bigger T's. The big T around truths around, well, how have they concluded what productivity is in their life? And that changes their whole perception of what productivity might look like. So instead of coming up with a plan right away of, hey, this is what you could change, which might or might not work long term, that completely helps them shift their perspective that will align with who they are at their core. So that's going deeper than probably even their emotions. That's going deeper than what they've been taught. And this is the realm of, I think, potential. This is the realm of, in the words of a researcher, or more of a spiritual teacher, who said that, who were you before the world got its hands on you? And if you bring that part of you along with what you've learned in the world, what could you create with that? and helping them see that deeper part of themselves, that they're more than a collection of environmental influences. And that's a very different dimension of coaching. It requires a lot of deep work. And in the words of Rich Libin, and this is the other part of coaching, is it requires deep listening and active listening versus, oh, I'm just listening to what on the surface they're saying.
Yeah. Love that. So I feel like we've done we've definitely unpacked what are some of the things that we believe a good coach or good coaching is about. We've talked a little bit about, what is it not, such as telling people what to do is, and I'll tell you, I've had a number of experiences, and I think the different disciplines definitely use coaching. The word coaching is differently. And as you were talking earlier, I was even thinking about like the first way, or the first discipline that I heard the term coach was in sports. And my coach in volleyball, they didn't ask me what, or in basketball, for example, they didn't ask me like, what play do you think we should do? They told me this is what we need to do. So even in sports coaching, there's a lot more of directives than fact finding and questioning and stuff like that. And I think about some of the coaches I've hired over the past few years. There have been a couple that I've been super disappointed with because I had a different perception of what they were going to be doing. And particularly it's in the health field. I've hired coaches to help with fitness. And there was one even, I was so excited to start with him because it was a fitness and health coach that it was, dealt with nutrition. It provided a fitness exercise activity plan. And there was a mindset component to it where I'd get one-on-one coaching. I'm like, yes, I'm so looking forward to that. But what it ended up being is him just kind of talking and telling me stuff. And I'm like, you're not really uncovering what mindset issues I've got that are keeping me stuck from really, living my most healthy lifestyle. And so I've noticed that, and I've had multiple coaches for nutrition and different things like that. And I kind of feel like they're all very similar, or at least ones that where it's less questions and more like telling me this is the kind of thing you should be eating and this is why and blah, 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 but not really working to uncover the barriers or the things that are getting in the way of executing. So I do think the term coaching still does have a very different connotation depending on the industry or the things that they're doing. So I don't know. I've found that a little frustrating over the past couple of years. I thought I knew what I was getting into.
And that's pretty normal, and this is why coaching is not fully an industry. There are no fully agreed upon, hey, this is what coach, or 8 core ICF, for example, has their 8 core principles of coaching, but they decided what those are, just like we have shared it based on our experience with other coaches. But this could change over time as this becomes more of an industry, and there are certain standards and principles that we need to uphold. And so obviously this is open, and there's that last part also alluded to the modality then. Now this is where that modality comes in. So high performance, and the one thing I want to point out, if you actually dig deeper and find out what coaching is more of an eclectic practice. It comes from therapy, parts of it. Parts of it come from that sports coaching and challenging and getting people to be motivated. Parts of it comes from deeper practices of spirituality, and parts of it comes from our experiences. There are all sorts of things come together that make up what coaching might be, but we don't haven't fully defined what that is, and that's fine, because. And this is what I actually find exciting in the coaching world, is that we're kind of the pioneers of this path. we're going to build what that looks like based on, and as it always does, the market decides what works and what doesn't. Because if your coaching is working, you're giving people results. And if it's not working, then you're not going to have a practice. And the modalities will come in. So for example, there is a training component to coaching because it gives us perspective. High performance has a framework and there are training components in it, but we go deeper into these areas. Whether it's high performance coaching, transformational coaching, conscious parenting coaching, everybody will have their model of how you navigate this. But at the human level, I think these principles might be helpful for you to consider of going deeper than the surface, connecting with the client, obviously establishing rapport, helping them feel safe, challenging the client, understanding that you're not there to just give advice or perspective, that you're going deeper than that. You're tapping into their wisdom, of helping them understand who they are with the mix of everything that they've grew up with, and helping that person make sense of their life, their past, their present, and more specifically their future, of what they're actually creating in their business, their life, and so many aspects, and who they're becoming in the process. So I think that those principles might be helpful in almost every category of coaching. How it applies will change based on the model.
Yeah. And I think this is a great opportunity for the coaches that are listening, and for us, is to continue to find, to refine what it is that we do, how we do it, and use that as our unique value proposition when we're talking with potential new clients or when we're marketing ourselves. You know, this is how I do coaching. I am not going to tell you what to do. I'm not going to force you. I'm not going to do, you know, whatever the thing is. You know, you can set yourself apart differently than maybe some of the other coaches in your industry. You may not be a high performance coach. You probably aren't a high performance coach, and you kind of have another niche that you are doing. You know, what are they doing? And maybe, you know, you can define the way and the style of your delivery as different from them, which can help set you apart, you know, and help you be seen as unique in what you're doing and in the field that you're doing it, or the results that you're getting. So I think there's an opportunity there to get a little bit more explicit, that not a lot of coaches do.
As I thought about this, I think there would be at some point, if we go towards bigger conversations or we do start to do events for the Coach's Journey podcast, this might be a really cool question to get people from different modalities to help them explain how they approach their coaching. And I think that's the power of Coaching Mastery community as well. And one of the reasons why I was really excited to get coaches who are from different modalities, because it helps us see different ways of how someone might approach coaching. And the more I've been exposed to different ways, the more, even if I've adapted parts of it into my coaching practice, it has expanded the experience of coaching for my clients, especially if it's given that result, especially if it's gotten them to pause and think and be more intentional, especially if it's gotten them to create a behavior change, or especially if it's helped them expand their vision of what they're creating. So being around other coaches, I think it's incredibly essential for us to build an industry, to understand like what are we creating collectively as coaches? Is there a collection? Right now, it's kind of all over the place in the world, and that's why you hear everybody's calling themselves a coach these. But what is it really? What are they doing? And also, what Dr. Sheri is that the more we learn these things, the more we expand our perspective, the more we can differentiate ourselves as coaches. Like, hey, what I'm going to go take you through, most other coaches will not. So this is going to serve you much more. And this is why, because I'm connected to this industry. I'm connected to this certification. I'm connected to the world of coaching. I'm not just an independent coach randomly taking people through a process.
Yeah, wonderful. All right, guys, I am sure that you got some value out of this. At the very least, that you have been able to think about the way that you practice as a coach and how you think about your practice, so that you can be more intentional in what style of coach you want to be, and how you talk about that with friends, family, and most importantly, potential clients. And so, as we said at the whole start of this, It's not that Faisal and I think that we own or know exactly all of the answers to these. This has been just a kind of exploratory conversation, hoping to get your brain going and our brains going, and just continuing the conversation around what is coaching, what is not coaching, how do we think about it, how do we then live out of our own stories around how we coach and who we are as coaches. So I trust that this was a thought-provoking topic for you today, and carry that with you and grapple with it. Like, these are the good things that can help you grow and improve yourself as a coach.
Yeah, I love that. And we'd love to hear from you, because we want to expand our perspective as well. So make sure you share in the comments, send us an email, send us a DM about what you thought of the conversation. What's your take on what coaching is and isn't? And I'll actually leave this with, there was an interview that I listened to Brendan Burchard, and the interviewer asked him, well, what do you do as a coach? And he said it very briefly. He said that, well, here's how I know I am coaching. My clients don't pay me to teach them stuff. My clients pay me to help them create results in their life. And whether those results are in how they perceive themselves and how they think about themselves, their family, their life, whether that result is in creating a better life, a better business, a better path for them, whatever the result is, as coaches, I think bottom line might be that is that we help people create results in their life. We don't necessarily pretend to be experts that know everything and follow my plan and you're going to do this, but we help them tap into their own power, their own wisdom, and figure out what it might be the right path through a very exploratory experience that we went through explaining today.
Beautiful. All right, guys, thank you so much for listening, for watching, for spending this time with us. We are super blessed and grateful that you have joined in, even if we haven't seen you or met you yet. Have a fantastic week, and we'll see you next week.
All right, bye.
Bye.
You're listening to the Coach's Journey podcast.